My grandmother, Dorothy, passed away at 87. I knew she lived modestly in a small Boston apartment, but the lawyer's call changed everything. She owned a mansion on Martha's Vineyard worth $3 million. To inherit it, I had to complete 5 mysterious tasks. Each one revealed pieces of a love story from the 1950s, a romance my family never knew existed. Please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment if you want to hear more stories about hidden pasts and second chances at love. I always thought I knew my grandmother, Dorothy Williams. She was the quiet, dignified woman who lived in that small 2-bedroom apartment on Commonwealth Avenue in Boston for over 45 years. The same apartment where I'd visit her on Sunday afternoons, where she'd serve tea in chipped porcelain cups and tell me stories about her years as a high school English teacher. Her home was modest but impeccably neat, bookshelves lined with classic literature, a few antique pieces of furniture that had been in the family for generations, and always fresh flowers on the windowsill even in winter. Dorothy had been widowed for 25 years. My grandfather, Walter, had been a kind but unremarkable accountant who died of a heart attack at 62. Their marriage seemed pleasant enough, though never passionate from the stories I'd heard. They'd raised my father in that same apartment, saved modestly for retirement, and lived what everyone considered an ordinary middle-class life. She was always elegantly put together, her silver hair pinned neatly, modest dresses in subdued colors, a single strand of pearls she wore nearly every day. We were close, or at least I thought we were. I'd stop by weekly, help with groceries, and occasionally take her to doctor appointments. She seemed to enjoy our conversations about books and my work as a freelance photographer, though she rarely talked about herself. There were hints, I realize now, a certain faraway look that would come over her when she gazed out her window toward the harbor. A small collection of photos I once found in her dresser drawer, black and white images of beaches and lighthouses that she quickly put away when I asked about them. She never spoke of Martha's Vineyard, not once in all our conversations. When she died peacefully in her sleep, it seemed the natural conclusion to a quiet life. The funeral was small, just my parents, my younger brother, and a handful of former colleagues. We grieved, of course, but there was also a sense of completion, a modest life lived with dignity, now finished. None of us expected anything more, until the phone call came. 3 weeks after we scattered her ashes in Boston Harbor. "Is this Sarah Williams?" The man's voice was formal, professional. "Yes, it is. Who's calling, please?" "My name is Alexander Bennett. I'm an attorney with Bennett and Associates on Martha's Vineyard. I'm calling regarding your grandmother, Dorothy Williams." "My grandmother? I'm sorry, but she passed away last month." "Yes, Ms. Williams, I'm aware. That's precisely why I'm calling. I was your grandmother's attorney for many years. She has named you as the beneficiary of her estate on Martha's Vineyard." "Martha's Vineyard? There must be some mistake. My grandmother lived in Boston. She didn't own property on the vineyard." There was a pause on the line. "I assure you, Ms. Williams, there is no mistake. Your grandmother, Dorothy Williams, was the owner of the seaside estate in Edgartown, Martha's Vineyard, a property currently valued at approximately $3 million. I nearly dropped the phone. "That's impossible." "I understand your surprise, Ms. Williams. Perhaps you could come to my office on the island? There are matters regarding your inheritance that must be discussed in person." The next day found me on the Woods Hole Ferry, watching the Massachusetts coastline recede behind me. My mind was racing with questions. How had my grandmother, a retired public school teacher who clipped coupons and darned her own socks, managed to own a multi-million-dollar estate on one of the most exclusive islands in America? And why had she kept it secret her entire life? Mr. Bennett's office was in a converted captain's house near the Edgartown harbor. He was an older gentleman with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of lawyer who seemed to have stepped out of a different era. "Your grandmother purchased the property in 1987, he explained, shuffling through a folder of documents. "Though her connection to the property dates back much further." "I don't understand." "She never mentioned owning property here. We thought we knew everything about her life." Mr. Bennett's expression softened. "Sometimes the people closest to us hold the deepest secrets, Ms. Williams. Your grandmother had her reasons for privacy." He pulled out a sealed envelope. "This is your grandmother's last will and testament. It contains some unusual provisions." As he read the document aloud, I felt as though I was hearing about a stranger, not the woman who had raised my father and baked me cookies when I was a child. To my beloved granddaughter, Sarah Williams, I leave Seaside Estate and all its contents, valued at approximately $3 million, provided she completes 5 specific tasks within 90 days of my passing. Tasks? I interrupted. What kind of tasks? Mr. Bennett adjusted his glasses. These tasks must be completed in order, and evidence of completion must be presented to my attorney. Failure to complete all 5 tasks within the specified time frame will result in the property being donated to the Martha's Vineyard Historical Society. The first task: visit the lighthouse at Gay Head and find what I left in the keeper's log. The second task: have tea at the Atlantic House where we first danced. The third task: find the boat named Summer Promise at Menemsha Harbor. The fourth task: open the safe in the library. Password is our song. The fifth and final task: read my letters to understand why I chose silence. I sat back, stunned. This makes no sense. Why would she do this? Your grandmother was very specific about these conditions. She wanted you to understand something important before you inherited her property. But what does it all mean? What keeper's log? What song? This is bizarre. I'm afraid I don't have those answers, Ms. Williams. Your grandmother was quite private about her reasons. She simply asked me to ensure that you complete these tasks if you wish to claim your inheritance. When I called my parents that evening, their reaction mirrored my own disbelief. This is absurd, my father said. Mom never mentioned owning property on the vineyard. And these tasks, it sounds like she wasn't in her right mind. My mother was more practical. $3 million, Sarah. That's a significant inheritance. Perhaps you should just sell the property and split the proceeds. Why jump through these hoops? But something about the mystery intrigued me. I'd always felt there was more to my grandmother than her quiet Boston life suggested. Those hidden photographs, those moments of distant melancholy. Perhaps this was my chance to discover who Dorothy Williams really was. I'm going to do it, I told them. I'm going to complete these tasks. The next morning, I drove to Edgartown to see Seaside Estate for the first time. As I turned onto the private drive, the house came into view, and my breath caught in my throat. It was a magnificent Victorian mansion, 3 stories of weathered gray shingles and white trim, with a wraparound porch and widow's walk overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. Massive hydrangea bushes in full bloom bordered the property, and a stone path led through immaculate gardens to the main entrance. The key Mr. Bennett had given me turned smoothly in the lock. I stepped into a foyer with soaring ceilings and a crystal chandelier. The interior was a perfectly preserved time capsule, not of the Victorian era when the house was built, but of the 1950s. Vintage furniture filled the rooms, arranged as if waiting for guests to arrive for cocktails. A record player stood in the corner of the living room, beside a collection of vinyl albums. The kitchen featured a pastel blue refrigerator and matching stove that must have been considered ultra-modern when installed. Throughout the house, black and white photographs hung on the walls: beaches, lighthouses, gardens in bloom. But curiously, no people. The library was particularly stunning. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, leather armchairs, and a large desk positioned to capture views of the garden and ocean beyond. And there in the corner was a vintage floor safe, its dial gleaming in the afternoon light. I ran my fingers along book spines, opened drawers, peeked into closets, trying to reconcile this elegant mansion with my grandmother's modest Boston apartment. It seemed impossible that the same woman had inhabited both spaces. One represented the life she showed the world. The other, something hidden and preserved like an insect in amber. The next morning, I drove to Aquina to begin the first task. The Gay Head Lighthouse stood on a dramatic clay cliff at the westernmost point of the island, its red brick tower a landmark for over 150 years. A small museum occupied the keeper's quarters at the base of the lighthouse. I'm looking for an old keeper's log, I told the elderly docent at the desk. She peered at me over her reading glasses. The logs from before 1970 are in the archive room. Any particular year you're interested in? I hesitated. The 1950s, I think. Early to mid-50s. She led me to a small room lined with metal shelving. Keeper's logs are there, chronological order. Sign in, please, and don't remove anything from the building. For the next 2 hours, I carefully paged through dusty logbooks, scanning entries about weather conditions, ship sightings, and maintenance tasks. I was about to give up when a folded piece of paper slipped from between the pages of the 1952 log. The yellowed paper contained a handwritten entry that wasn't part of the official record. June 21st, 1952. Dee met Jay here today at sunset. She came from Boston for the summer, teaching at the island school. He's a local boy, though boy hardly seems the right word for a man of 30 who runs half the businesses on the island. They talked for hours on the cliff, watching the light sweep across the water. Never seen two people fall in love so fast. Like they recognized each other from another life. R. Collins, assistant keeper. Below this entry was a small drawing, 2 initials inside a heart, DM plus JT. My grandmother's maiden name had been Morrison. DM, Dorothy Morrison. And JT, who was he? On the back of the paper, in handwriting I recognized as my grandmother's, was a fragment of poetry. Here where the light meets sea, I found you waiting for me. 2 souls adrift no more, anchored on this island shore. I carefully photographed the note as evidence for Mr. Bennett, then continued my search through the logs. In the 1953 book, I found a pressed wildflower marking another entry. September 4th. Dee and Jay at the lighthouse again. Their second summer together. Jay's family doesn't approve. She's not from here, they say. Not good enough for a Thatcher. Fools. Anyone can see they're meant for each other. He brought a picnic at sunset. They stayed until the stars came out. Thatcher. JT was Jay Thatcher, one of the oldest, wealthiest families on Martha's Vineyard. The pieces were beginning to fall into place. The second task led me to the Atlantic House, a grand old hotel and restaurant in Oak Bluffs. The building had been renovated over the years, but still maintained its 19th century charm, with wide verandas and gingerbread trim. I requested tea service in the main dining room, feeling slightly foolish. What was I supposed to find here? An elderly waiter approached my table. His name tag read, Henry, serving since 1968. "Excuse me, Henry," I said. "I'm wondering if you might have worked here in the 1950s. He smiled, revealing a gap between his front teeth. "Not me, miss, but my father ran this place for 40 years before me. I grew up right here in these dining rooms." "Did you ever know a Dorothy Morrison? She would have been here in the early 50s. Henry's eyes widened. "Dorothy Morrison? Of course. She was the summer school teacher who fell in love with John Thatcher." He leaned closer. "Quite the scandal it was, too. Are you related to her?" "She was my grandmother." Henry straightened, studying my face. "I see the resemblance now. Same eyes." He glanced around the nearly empty dining room. "Wait here a moment." He returned with a framed photograph that had been hanging in a hallway near the kitchen. Friday nights in the 50s, this place was the center of island social life. Dance floor, live band, the works. The photograph showed couples dancing in an elegant ballroom. In the foreground, a young woman in a full-skirted dress was caught mid-twirl, her face partially turned away from the camera, but her joy unmistakable. Behind her, a tall man in a dinner jacket held her hand, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that seemed to leap from the black and white image. "That's them," Henry said softly. "Summer of 1954. Every Friday night they dance right there." He pointed to a spot near the windows. The band would always play Unchained Melody for them. It was their song. Their song, I repeated, remembering the fourth task. "Password is our song." "The Thatchers didn't approve," Henry continued. "They had plans for John to marry Elizabeth Woodley, banker's daughter from Boston, proper society girl. But John only had eyes for your grandmother." "What happened to them?" Henry's expression grew sad. "Life happened, miss. Social pressure. Family expectations. They're powerful things." He tapped the photograph. "But for those 3 summers, they were the most in love couple I'd ever seen." After finishing my tea and collecting photographic evidence of the second task, I drove to Menemsha, a working fishing village on the western part of the island. The small harbor was filled with weathered fishing boats, the air heavy with the scent of salt and diesel. Finding a boat named Summer Promise seemed like searching for a needle in a haystack, but I showed Dorothy's photo to a group of fishermen mending nets on the dock. "Thatcher's boat," said one, nodding toward the end of the pier. "Been here for decades. Old John kept it in perfect condition while he was alive. Family still maintains it, though nobody uses it much these days." The Summer Promise was a classic wooden sailboat about 30 feet long, its hull a deep navy blue, brass fittings gleaming in the afternoon sun. It looked lovingly maintained and impossibly romantic. An elderly man sat on a nearby dock, repairing fishing equipment. When I approached, he squinted up at me. "You're Dorothy's granddaughter," he said. It wasn't a question. "How did you know?" "Been expecting you. Bennett said you might come by." "I'm Franklin Reed. I was John's friend." He set aside his work. "Knew them both back then. The summer lovers. Can you tell me about them?" Franklin gazed out at the harbor. "They met that first summer, 1952. Dorothy came to teach summer school. John was running his family's shipping business. They were crazy about each other right from the start." He pointed to the sailboat. "He bought that for her second summer here. They'd sail out in the evenings, stay out till the stars came up." "What went wrong?" "John was engaged to another woman. Family arrangement, had been since he was in college. He was going to break it off, marry Dorothy instead." Franklin shook his head. "But when old man Thatcher found out, he threatened to disown John. And worse, he had friends on the school board. Said he'd make sure Dorothy never taught again anywhere in Massachusetts. That's terrible." "Different times, miss. The Thatchers had power, and they weren't afraid to use it." He stood slowly, knees cracking with the effort. "You should see the boat. I've got the key." The interior of the Summer Promise was immaculate, its teak and mahogany gleaming as if it had been polished yesterday. In the small cabin, Franklin pointed to a plank above the berth where 2 sets of initials had been carved, DM plus JT, surrounded by a heart. John's wife never came aboard this boat, not once in 40 years of marriage. This was their special place. Franklin reached beneath a cushion and pulled out a small mahogany box. He kept this hidden here all these years. Inside the box was a vintage engagement ring, a sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds, along with a stack of letters tied with faded ribbon, and several photographs of my grandmother as a young woman. In one, she stood laughing on the deck of this very boat, her hair blowing in the wind, looking carefree and completely in love. "They were going to elope," Franklin said quietly. "Had it all planned. But Dorothy found out what John's father threatened, and she disappeared. Left the island without saying goodbye, broke John's heart. I returned to Seaside Estate with the box of treasures, my mind swimming with revelations. My grandmother, proper, reserved Dorothy Williams, had been part of a passionate, forbidden romance. She had nearly eloped with the scion of one of Martha's Vineyard's wealthiest families. It seemed impossible, yet the evidence was right in front of me. In the library, I studied the floor safe. The password was Our Song, which I now knew to be Unchained Melody. But how did that translate to a combination? After several failed attempts, I searched the house for clues. In the living room, I found an old record collection and thumbed through it until I found a copy of Unchained Melody by the Righteous Brothers. Inside the sleeve was a series of numbers, 7/25/1955. When I entered those numbers into the safe, the door swung open. Inside was a leather-bound journal, a stack of newspaper clippings, and a manila envelope containing what appeared to be a marriage certificate. With trembling hands, I examined the document. It stated that on July 25th, 1955, Dorothy Morrison and John Thatcher were married in a private ceremony in Provincetown, Massachusetts. They had actually gone through with it. The journal was my grandmother's, starting in the summer of 1952 and continuing for decades. I spent hours reading, piecing together the story of Dorothy and John. They had met at the lighthouse, just as the keeper's log indicated. John had been there to inspect some family property. Dorothy had come to watch the sunset after her first week teaching summer school. They had talked until midnight, and made plans to meet again the next day. For 3 summers, they carried on their romance, meeting at the lighthouse, dancing at the Atlantic House, sailing on the Summer Promise. John's family disapproved. Dorothy was a public school teacher from a middle-class Boston family, not the society bride they had planned for their son. In July of 1955, they secretly married. But within days, John's father discovered their marriage license. The confrontation that followed was ugly. Old man Thatcher threatened to ruin Dorothy's career and to cut John off without a penny, which would have been a disaster, as John had already invested in business ventures assuming his inheritance. Dorothy made the heartbreaking decision to leave, believing she was freeing John from an impossible choice. She returned to Boston, resumed her teaching career, and eventually married my grandfather, a kind man who knew he was second choice, but loved her anyway. The most shocking revelation came in the last section of documents from the safe. A letter from John, dated 1986. My dearest Dorothy, it has been 31 years since we parted. Not a day has gone by that I haven't thought of you, haven't regretted my cowardice. I should have chosen you. I should have walked away from my family's money and expectations. Instead, I lived the life that was planned for me. Married Elizabeth, had children, took over the family business. From the outside, it probably looked like success. But you should know that it was a hollow life. Elizabeth and I were never happy together. We were polite strangers raising children in the same house. The only true joy I ever knew was during those 3 summers with you. I'm writing now because Elizabeth passed away last year, and I've been diagnosed with heart problems that the doctors say will likely take me within 5 years. I've purchased Seaside Estate. It's the house we always admired on our evening walks, the one where we would stop and imagine a life together. I'm offering it to you, Dorothy. It's yours, free and clear. I've made the arrangements with Bennett. Consider it poor reparation for the life we should have had. I understand if you want nothing to do with me or this property. But if you could find it in your heart to meet me one last time, I'll be at the lighthouse on the anniversary of our first meeting. June 21st. I'll wait all day. With love eternal, John. Accompanying newspaper clippings filled in the rest of the story. John Thatcher had indeed died of heart failure in 1992. He had been a prominent businessman, civic leader, and philanthropist. His obituary mentioned his wife of nearly 40 years, Elizabeth, his 3 children, and 7 grandchildren. But nothing about Dorothy Morrison. The final letter in the collection was from my grandmother to John, never sent. My dearest John, I didn't come to the lighthouse that day. I couldn't bear it, seeing you after all these years, knowing we had lost our chance. I was a coward too. But I've accepted your gift of Seaside Estate. Not to live in. I cannot leave Boston now, with Walter's health failing, but as a memorial to what might have been. I will keep it exactly as it was during the time we should have shared it. Perhaps in another life, we'll get it right. Always yours, Dorothy. My grandmother had accepted the house but continued to live in Boston. She had maintained Seaside Estate. From afar, keeping it as a shrine to their lost love. All those years in her modest apartment, she had been the secret owner of this magnificent property. My final task was to read her letters and understand why she chose silence. I now knew. She had protected John's reputation, his family legacy, and the lives that had been built on the foundation of their sacrifice. She had kept their love story private out of respect for all who would have been hurt by its revelation. As I completed the 5th task, I began researching the Thatcher family. John had 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter, all now in their 60s. They still lived on the island, prominent members of the community. The eldest son, John Jr., ran the family business. His mother, Elizabeth, was still alive at 92, living in the main Thatcher estate in Edgartown. I was their half-sibling's daughter. We shared blood. Did they have a right to know? After days of deliberation, I arranged a meeting with John Jr. at his office. He was a distinguished-looking man with silver hair and familiar eyes, the same eyes I'd seen in the photos of his father. "Mr. Thatcher, thank you for seeing me. My name is Sarah Williams. I've recently inherited property on the island from my grandmother, Dorothy Williams, formerly Morrison." His expression remained polite but neutral. "Congratulations on your inheritance. What can I do for you, Ms. Williams?" I hesitated, then placed the marriage certificate on his desk. "I believe our families have a connection that you might not be aware of." As he read the document, his composed expression crumbled. "This can't be real. My father married your grandmother? Before my mother?" "Yes, briefly. In 1955. "Why are you telling me this? What do you want? Money?" "No," I said quietly. "Just truth. I recently learned that my grandmother and your father had a relationship that spanned decades, though mostly from afar. He bought Seaside Estate for her in the 1980s. John Jr. sat heavily in his chair. "The house on Harbor View. He told us it was an investment property." He shook his head. "I don't understand. My parents were married for nearly 40 years. "Yes, they were. And my grandmother respected that marriage. She never interfered, never reached out to your father. She protected your family's privacy, even after his death." "Then why are you here now? Why disrupt things after all these years?" It was a fair question. Why had I come? "Because I think your father wanted someone to know the truth. That he loved my grandmother his entire life. That he had regrets. That doesn't diminish his commitment to your family. He clearly took his responsibilities seriously. But I thought you deserved to know there was another side to him." John Jr. was silent for a long moment. "My father was always distant, proper, fulfilled all his obligations. But there was a sadness about him I never understood." He looked up at me. "You have his eyes, you know, not mine, his." In the following weeks, I met the other Thatcher children. Their reactions varied. John's sister was fascinated and wanted to know everything about Dorothy, while his younger brother was angry, feeling it somehow tarnished their family narrative. I did not approach Elizabeth. At 92, the knowledge seemed more likely to cause pain than bring peace. As for Seaside Estate, I decided to keep it, at least for now. I took a leave of absence from my photography work in Boston and moved into the mansion for the summer, sleeping in the rooms where my grandmother never stayed, walking the beaches she and John had loved. One evening, I visited the Gay Head Lighthouse at sunset, just as they had done so many years ago. The view was spectacular. Clay cliffs dropping to the sea, waves crashing far below, the lighthouse beam beginning its nightly journey across the water. I placed a bouquet of wildflowers at the base of the tower, one for Dorothy and one for John. Their story had no perfect ending. They made choices based on the values and pressures of their time. They chose duty over passion, responsibility over personal happiness. Was it right? Was it wrong? I couldn't judge them across the decades, but I could honor their love by remembering it, by understanding that sometimes the loudest love stories are the ones kept silent, and by recognizing that regret and joy can exist in the same heart, just as the lighthouse sends both warning and guidance from the same beam. Some loves aren't meant to be lived, but they deserve to be remembered. Would you have revealed the truth? Should love bow to social pressure? Leave your comment below. Subscribe for more emotional stories. Share if you believe true love deserves to be remembered.